I was considering doing a full-on review of the Archon quest once 4.2 comes along with the final act, but I also wanted to give my theories first, so I'm going to kill two birds with one stone. The Fontaine Archon quests Act 1 through 4 have been amazing storylines filled with compelling character arcs, thrilling sub-stories, and the reiteration of the Samsara cycle from the Sub-Zero's festival. So today, I'm going to be giving my thoughts and honest review of the first 4 parts of the Archon quest before diving into my personal speculations about Act 5. And honestly, I'm really excited to see what Farina has been cooking. But before we begin, have you ever wanted to bring your waifus to Laifu? Aster, never say that again. Well, I bring to you GENSHINSTAR, your go-to Genshin Impact merch store with all sorts of interesting things of your favorite Genshin characters. It's a licensed fan-made store and they've got light boxes, shirts, this thing, and plushies. Okay, so story time. I actually had a friend that bought a bunch of Genshin bags from GENSHINSTAR before, and now Erin, if you're watching this, please don't hurt me. She told me that if I so much as got the fabric wet with water and stuff, she'd cut off my hand. So I'm kinda scared. I don't know. Anyway, I am now also on a mission to buy a bunch of body pillows to stack onto my bed or give to an unsuspecting victim for Christmas. Imagine being in a family dinner and unwrapping this bad boy. They've also got this Christmas advent calendar which is on sale, so yeah, check it out. Use my coupon code Aster for 10% discount, and thank you so much to GENSHINSTAR for sponsoring this video. Anyway, back to Fontaine. Just at a glance, the Fontaine Archon quest is definitely a step up in terms of animation, production quality, and cinematography compared to the other nations, except maybe Sumeru because that's where they started getting experimental with camera angles. Genshin has consistently been improving its cutscene quality, and yes, while we're still stuck in the visual novel-ish kind of thing, the cinematography for Fontaine has a lot more dynamic camera movement that really enhance the character's emotions. I would absolutely sell someone's left kidney to see the Mondstadt Leo and Inazuma cutscenes get reworked with the tools that Sumeru and Fontaine have for camera dynamics, but that's just me. The story of Fontaine is an interesting tackle into a much more subdued conflict than the other Archon quests. The way Fontaine handled the story of the Primordial Sea in Act 1 and 2 feels like how Leo has sprinkled hints of Rex Lapis's death in Osial's unsealing through the smaller pieces of lore and hints. The story of Fontaine feels more like a series of unfortunate events which are slowly forming the main tension of the series, as opposed to something like Mondstadt's active dragon crisis or Inazuma's war. And honestly, this story structure works very well in its favor. Instead of actively focusing on the concept of the Primordial Sea, we instead see how the macro affects the microscopic lives of the people of Fontaine. The water from the Primordial Sea and the flood affect a lot of storylines that we tackled, but we were never truly at the forefront of actually stopping it until the later acts. The stories of Act 1, 2, 3, and 4 feel distinct enough that it warrants getting reviewed differently, so that's what I'll be doing. So let's begin with Act 1. Out of all of the intros that we've had for an Archon quest, I think Fontaine is up there with Mondstadt when it comes to the strongest introductions. The first act of a good story needs to be compelling, and I'm glad to say that Fontaine delivered. Act 1 wastes no time in introducing its pivotal characters and has them take over the spotlight without meandering on several NPC stories or dialogue. Lyney, Lynette, Fremine, Farina, and Nervalet establish themselves as interesting main characters, and we constantly see them around instead of being on and off characters like Amber, Kaya, and Lisa in the Mondstadt Archon quest. What I really like about this quest is that it gives us what we know about Fontaine. It tells us the overarching plot with the prophecy in the flood, that it ups the stakes by actually making the story revolve around the characters instead of just presenting the problem. Lyney's magic show delivered on what it needs to deliver, and the investigation part really sells the whole motif of Fontaine. They also integrated the new system for finding clues and deducing stuff, which isn't new since Sumeru did it already technically, but they improved it with the notes system. Farina was absolutely a treat to deal with, and I love that we can just see how delusional she can get. We love a delusional queen. What I also appreciate about the investigation part is that it trusts the audience that we're picking up on stuff. I don't know if it was obvious, but Paimon and the Traveler's intelligences were respected by the narrative instead of Paimon just pointing out the obvious for shock value. That was kind of a problem in older Archon quests because they really wanted to hype the small details, but for Fontaine, they really reduced that kind of thing, and they're just like, oh, okay, so we know this kind of detail and we're going to work on it. And that's just that. They don't need to overhype it. Overall, the first act was a solid 8 out of 10 with a very, very cool conclusion with the needed build-up. If there was one thing that I would fix, and honestly this goes for the other parts as well, it's that the mystery solving can feel kind of overwhelming since the culprit is a character we barely know anything about. so there's not a lot of stakes when the grand reveal happens. But I guess that's less of a problem with the Archon quest and more of a problem with Genshin's character story. We've got a limited time to get these stories done and over with, so I wouldn't consider it that big of a flaw. Now, the Act 2 of the Archon quest, in my opinion, is one of the best ways to write a character's development alongside the main story. I've said this before that my biggest problem with the Archon quest was that it sacrificed microscopic character development. Something like how Kazuha's friend's death was supposed to be super compelling because it was a main motivation for the Traveler and for Kazuha to actually see how vile the Inazuma War can be, but it had to be sidelined for the sake of jamming in the other characters. There wasn't enough time. So imagine my surprise when I find out that Act 2 was solely dedicated to Navia. Act 2 had a lot more NPCs and a bit of ass-pulling somewhere there, but the mystery was honestly really nice, and the emotions that Navia and Neuvillette felt was so compelling story-wise that it honestly just makes you feel for her as a character. The last twist with Tartaglia not only being condemned, but also because he was framed by the Confrere, takes the cake for being one of the better twists of Genshin Impact, because most of the time Genshin doesn't really deal with twist stories, but it did remain unanswered in the next act, so I hope that they address that. Navia and her father's story was surprisingly more compelling than I thought that it would be, and I absolutely love her NPC bodyguards. I think that the setup was long, though, and the problem with having to feel for a character we never really met before is kind of a suspension of disbelief, especially for her father. But I honestly think that they wrote his character well enough alongside Navia, so I honestly don't think that's too big of a flaw. The reveal of the evil bad guy, though, was really dope. I like that they respected the Chekhov's gun principle, where the Confrere was antagonistic towards Tartaglia in the first act, which led to his framing in the second act. Consistency. Navia was a great character, and the cutscene at the end was absolutely beautiful. The motive of the murder was sound and connected with the rest of the story, and Tartaglia being convicted of the murder prior was such an interesting twist. I also love so much that we actually got to see Navia's perspective, instead of being just told that the court proceeding happened. Again, every time that Genshin steers away from the Traveler's POV to improve the other character's POV, I get free serotonin. Now, let's talk about Act 3. I don't really care if I'm being too brutally honest or missing the grand narratives of Act 3 because I honestly think the execution of the third act was poorer than the others. Not saying that it wasn't good, but it feels long. I joked a while ago that this was basically the Samsara Cycle 2.0, but when Paimon's repeating dialogue voice lines over and over again, and we're reusing cutscenes just to pad out runtime, I think I get to criticize. The tone of Act 3 is supposed to be an incognito mission, with the Traveler infiltrating the fortress of Merope to understand where Tartaglia went. However, that kind of subtext is immediately gone when we find out that the Duke actually knows why we're here and who sent us. It would actually have saved more time if Neuvillette just said that, oh, the Duke knows. The start of the act is really strong and honestly had a consistent premise where you build it from the previous acts of Arlecchino operating in the background. What's nice about this act is that we also got to see how the Fatui kids operate during missions. The atmosphere of the fortress is pretty nice though, considering that it's the strongest place we have for steampunk connections, plus the routinely work is reminiscent enough of real-life prisons. But I also believe that inspiration shouldn't have compromised execution, especially because this act was unnecessarily long. This act for me suffers from the classic Genshin problem of having too many characters pad out runtime. While it was necessary for world building and making the place feel alive and breathing, too much of a good thing is a bad thing, and that definitely applies here. Running around the place feels inconvenient, and repeating the work for the day is mind-numbing. The coupons didn't play that big of a role in the end and felt like a grind for something arbitrary. I also feel like the mystery about the hidden rules falls a bit flat. You've got these really cool premise about rumors and stuff, but the payoff doesn't feel proportional in my opinion. Tartaglia getting a crew here was fantastic though, but the mystery behind the hidden meat in the Fanta felt overhyped. There's supposed to be crucial acts of part 3 that serve as the overall mystery, but they ended up just being trivia questions for the last part with Wriothesley. Siegewin and Wriothesley were absolutely great characters, though. I love the Duke's charisma. I was really surprised that he was the way that he is, considering that he looked relatively quiet during the cutscenes and the trailer before this act. But seeing him on screen was really refreshing. Overall, I'd give this a solid 5 out of 10. Great ending, good use of characters, but I feel like I aged 4 years playing through it. Now this is where the good shit starts kicking in. Act 4 was short, but oh boy was it sweet. This is the perfect act, in my opinion. The needed build-up for the inevitable. This act wasted no time whatsoever showing us the different perspectives of the characters and just how massive this whole situation is. And what I absolutely love about this act is Arlecchino and Furina's conversation because of how nuanced it is. Here's the thing. As a spectator, we know that Furina has good intentions and that she probably has thought of the prophecy multiple times. Maybe she even has a plan. We know what kind of person she is beneath the mask and we sympathize with her. But Arlecchino's plight here is very valid. The fact that the government doesn't inspire confidence is really worrying. And the thing is, the problem isn't just a prophecy anymore. It's real. It's happening right now with very concrete consequences. Imagine if your government didn't do anything against the flood. Yeah, I'd be pissed off too. It's that dilemma in real life where we should trust in our government when there's a crisis, but it's not really out of reason to get angry with them when we believe there's incompetence. Especially when Furina wasn't able to answer Arlecchino's questions. For example, she asked what her plan was or any kind of emergency protocols, and Furina wasn't able to give anything. I'd also be pretty worried. So this conversation doesn't feel one-sided or there's a good or a bad, it feels honest and genuine. I also like that Arlecchino is relatively amicable to the Traveler and respects that they're just a third-party observer in all of this. The fact that she divulges that she's tried to straight-up assassinate Furina is absolutely hilarious, considering that she knows that the Traveler is supposed to be Furina's confidant. The cutscene with the flood is absolutely beautiful, and Genshin continues to amaze me with the great use of fight choreographies. This act is a solid 10 out of 10 for me. Now, the real question is, what is in store for Act 5? The first lingering thread is Child's origins and the fact that he was prosecuted for some unknown reason. I wonder if it has something to do with his malfunctioning vision or his origins with the narwhal messing up with the Oratrice's ability to deliver correct verdicts. We also now have confirmation that the flood is absolutely an active threat. The waters of the Primordial Sea are contaminating the regular seawater, thus making it dangerous for you to actually go there. And we have the confirmation of the Dragon of Water being Nervalet. I personally have a speculation that we'll be learning more about Celestia and the concept of primordial entities soon, considering both an Archon and the Dragon are working together to protect Fontaine. Furthermore, I want to see what happens with Lyney and Arlecchino, if Arlecchino will eventually usurp her and become a Fatui Harbinger in her place. Maybe something happens to Arlecchino, maybe not, we're not quite sure either. I honestly wonder if Arlecchino is actually going to be the boss of Fontaine. I really hope that she isn't and that we're actually going to fight something cooler, but it's also not out of the question that the Fatui Harbinger is going to be the main antagonist of this story. Overall, Act 5 is going to absolutely be a treat, and I am so excited to see how it all concludes from here on out. Anyway, my name is Aster and thank you for chilling with me. And remember, check out GENSHINSTAR with the promo code Aster and I'll see you all next time. Bye-bye!